Welcome back to Turning Hard Times into Good Times. I'm your host, Jay Taylor, and I'm really pleased to have one of my favorite guests with me once again, Richard Maybury. And Richard's been with me a number of times. His bio is posted at the Voice America, at my page at the Voice America Business Channel, and would tell you that you should go to earlywarningreport.com, earlywarningreport.com. Jot that address down, because you're going to want to go there after you listen to Richard for several reasons. One would be to buy his newsletter, which is a very reasonably priced letter, or one of those can't miss letters that I look eagerly towards reading every month. And also, he's got something new that he's put together that we want to talk to him about today. Thanks for joining me again, Richard.
Oh, it's great to be here, Jay. And incidentally, talking about newsletters, I was reading yours a few days ago, and I am so impressed at the investment results you're producing for your subscribers. I mean, these triple-digit gains are very nice.
Well, they are very nice, but let me just quickly and humbly say that it has more to do with the direction of the gold markets than it has to do with my expertise. Now, that said, I work very hard to find good companies, exploration companies that have the potential to find something that the big boys would be interested in. So you have these little mining companies with very small market caps, and if they find 1 million ounces or 5 or 10 million ounces, all of a sudden, relative to their valuation in the market, they become extremely valuable. Mm-hmm. And that's what's sort of happening and why these things are. So it's a matter of being on the long side of this market at the right time. And Richard, like I like to say, it's really a truism that a broken clock is right twice a day. So ultimately, if you stay long in gold, you'll be right. And right now, that's one of those times when we're having a good time. But in any event, thank you for the compliment. I do work hard, and I try my best to find good companies. But nobody works harder than you, I know, and nobody has written more books. Well, there are people that have written more books. Not too many people have written more books that are common sense books than you have. And so, again, folks, the reason to go to Early Warning Report to that website is to catch up with all of the things that Richard does. He's a prolific writer, and he's got something new we want to talk to him about today. In your letter, the last newsletter, the July letter, Richard, you stated, and I quote, "We're ready to solve one of your problems, perhaps the biggest," end of quote. And you go on to discuss that, and it really has to do with a lack of people's morality, I would say, the lack of knowledge of what is right and what is wrong. Can you elaborate on that a bit more?
Yeah, as you know, I do an awful lot of analysis of economic problems and geopolitical problems, and excuse me. There's also the problems that people run into every day in their businesses, especially business people, trying to find employees who are honorable. If you talk to 100 business people and ask them what's your worst problem, I think 99 would say, I can't find anybody who's an honest, hardworking person. Mm-hmm. And so the corruption that you see every day in your own personal life, in your career, your business, and all that, it stretches all the way up through the whole fabric of society, including, of course, the top levels of government, where people lie routinely. You can't believe anything they say, and it all comes down to the same problem, which is ethics, and that's why we have named our company Ethics Solutions, because
right now. So that's a separate company, Richard. Now that's a separate company from your newsletter company that publishes Early Warning Report, right?
Yes, right. Yeah. Ethics Solutions. Our web address is ethicssolutions.net, but you can also go to the Early Warning Report site and be connected if you want to. But they are separate companies. But the purpose of Ethics Solutions is to revive the teaching of ethics. And most Americans aren't aware now that the public schools stopped teaching ethics in the 1960s. It was just thrown out the door. And the children now only get very spotty kind of occasional comments about what's right and wrong. But there's no systematic teaching of ethics in the public schools.
Mm-hmm.
And I think we're seeing the result of it now. The whole United States, in fact, it's actually around the world. I mean, all of civilization is trying to operate without a clear set of ethics. And it's a catastrophe. Everybody knows it's a catastrophe. We live with it all day long, especially business people when they're trying to hire somebody.
Mm-hmm.
So that's what the company is supposed to do. And it's not really a new company so much as I think it's a new industry. The schools aren't teaching this anymore, and so we have decided that we'll start teaching it. And you can go to the website, you can read all about it. In 15 minutes, if you go to the website, you'll have a vastly better understanding of ethics and what's gone wrong with ethics than probably anybody you know.
I'd like to ask you why you think we went off the rails in the 1960s. Now, I think there was clearly I think what was consistent with the Constitution, that we were never to be a theocracy in the United States. I believe that. There are a lot of my Christian friends who might disagree with that, but I believe that, and we had Ron Paul on this show a couple of weeks ago, and Ron was talking about how he steered clear of anything that smacked of a theocracy. On the other hand, Ron noted that, if you go back to the Hammurabi Code or back to the Ten Commandments, he felt that the major religions had enough in common that it was possible for people to coexist and get along, and even if they didn't agree on theological issues, the very basic issues there was an agreement on. And that's what we hear Obama and others talking about, how they're good Muslims. There's good, and then you hear the other side of it. There's no such thing as a good Muslim in this. Well, what are your thoughts on this? How did we go off the rails in the 1960s? Why do you think then?
Well, there were two forces mainly that were at work. One is that there were two Supreme Court decisions that said that you can't teach religion in school. And up until that point, ethics had always been tied to religion. And the kids in public schools got Christian instruction. Mm-hmm. So when they threw out religion, they threw out the ethics too. It was, they threw the baby out with the bathwater.
Sure.
And they've kind of hung on to this idea that if you're teaching ethics, you are therefore teaching religion, which is not true, as you point out. There are certain basic rules for humans to get along with each other that go back thousands of years. And what we've done in our course, as you study the handbook, the ethics handbook, what you learn is, or one of the things you learn, is that there are two fundamental rules that all religions have always taught and that have always underlied what we call venerable law, the basic legal systems of all nations. And those two laws, or principles if you want, can be boiled down into 17 words. And those 17 words are, do all you have agreed to do, and that's the basis of contract law.
Sure.
And the other one is, do not encroach on other persons or their property. That's the basis of tort law and some criminal law. And those 17 words underlie all basic venerable law systems around the world in every society, from the British to the Zulus. Everybody has had those two laws, those 17 words. They state them in different ways, of course.
Yeah.
But those two laws, those 17 words, underlie everything, and you don't need to be talking about religion. You can just talk about, which is what we do. We talk about in the handbook when you run into a given situation that has ethics involved in it. You can go back to those 17 words and find the solution working upward from those 17 words. It used to be that people were taught how to do that when they were in school, but that's all been thrown away. And one of the points that I try to make so strongly with people is that ethics isn't just a bunch of rules that say don't do this and don't do that. Ethics is a tool that you can use for getting along with other people, because you have to get along with other people, especially almost everything humans do with each other has a contractual basis. Lawyers know this, but most people don't. Practically everything we do has some sort of a contract underlying it. Mm-hmm. And those two laws, those 17 words, are a tool which, once you know how to use them, that show you how to make these agreements with other people that will work well for both of you without getting you in trouble.
And I guess that's what you're doing with your course. Talk to us a little bit about your program then. What are you are trying to help people use these tools to get along with people, to make better business decisions, to make better decisions in life. I suppose if I'm a landlord, I want to know if my tenant is going to be honest. Mm-hmm. If I'm going to rent from a landlord, I want to know if he's going to uphold his side of the contract. Mm-hmm. Right. So what are you trying to do? What are you doing in your course, Richard, that can help my listeners?
We've taken what's about 6 years of ethics instructions that used to occur in schools, and we've boiled them down to about 2 hours of reading in the handbook. And then after you've gone through the handbook and you've got these tools in your head, then you're given a test, which is done online. You don't need to go anyplace for this. You can do it right from your own living room or your office. You just sit there at the computer for about an hour and you take this test. And that test is a judgment of how well you have absorbed these fundamental principles of ethics and how to use them in your daily life. Now, one of the things I'm really looking forward to with this new company is finding out how much help we are to people in their marriages. Because most people don't understand that marriage is first and foremost a contract between two people.
Sure it is.
And they never work out the terms of the contract. Most people never do. They never sit down and say, okay, now just exactly what it is we're agreeing to. They don't do that. So they're always having battles with each other that aren't necessary. And these battles come from the fact that they don't realize that there are certain principles that their agreement, which is their marriage, should have been based on.
Sure.
And when you come away from our handbook, which takes you just 2 hours to read, you're going to understand those principles, and I think it's going to be a very enlightening thing, and it's going to improve millions of marriages. And I don't think I'm exaggerating on that.
Well, that's that would be a tremendous help because, I guess money is one of the big things that break up marriages. Of course, unfaithfulness, spouse to their spouse, things like that. Yeah. If you, there is a marriage contract when you're married in a church or in a civil ceremony. At least in a church, there's this whole thing about, you're making an agreement with your spouse that then if that's not upheld, then obviously. That's. But I look forward to that, Richard. I need to take this course myself just to become more aware of it, and because if it can do all you say it can do, then we need to get as many people as possible taking advantage of that. And again, people should be going to ethicssolutions.net or to earlywarningreport.com, right?
Right. Either one will get you there.
I was thinking, Richard, as you were saying about those two basic laws, do what you say you're going to do, and then the other one had to do with respecting other people's property or something like that, that maybe one of the reasons that society is losing that is because government doesn't obey those rules. When you think about it, do they? Does government obey the rules?
That's an absolute truth. I would argue that the primary reason governments today exist is for the purpose of breaking those rules.
Yeah.
And the reason for that is that in the late 1800s, a group of intellectuals came up with this idea called socialism, which is actually a very ancient idea, but it was new and being revived in the late 1800s, and they decided to essentially make the whole world socialist. And they took over the schools and colleges, and they started teaching socialism in the schools and colleges. And today it just underlies everything that goes on in the public education system. Well, you can't have socialism and have these ethics at the same time, because one of those principles of ethics is do not encroach on other persons or their property.
Right.
And governments encroach all the time as they're trying to implement socialism. They dig down deep into your life, and they change things according to whatever they think are necessary. That's what these politicians and bureaucrats, that's why there are millions of politicians and bureaucrats in the United States today. Their job is to reach down into your life and change your life according to socialist principles, which are the opposite of these ancient ethical principles.
Right, and the notion, of course, that our limited government initially was to minimize government's intrusion on our lives and to allow us to be free. I asked Ron Paul, why in the world do we celebrate the 4th of July anymore anyway? I don't really get it, so I don't think most of the people have any idea. Of course, he wasn't in favor of abolishing it, as I suggested we should, but he thought it could be used as a time for teaching people. But in any event, it just seems to me that the idea that government intrusion into our property, and government doesn't do what they say they're going to do either. I mean, what politician running for office ever really says what he's,
Yep.
They don't live up to their promises.
Sure.
Well, is there anything more you'd like to say about ethics solutions at the moment, Richard? Because we want to entertain, have you back again at some point to talk more about this. But anything else you'd like to add about it that we haven't covered?
I think we've covered it pretty well. I just think, the basic thing that's wrong in practically every case in the world today is the loss of ethics. And what we're trying to do is restore ethics in a practical way that people can use every day to make their lives better. And I'm very, very confident you'll find you spend the 2 hours to read the handbook and the hour to take the test, you'll get a certificate that will state that you have passed the test and you understand ethics. And you can put that on your business card or your resume or in advertising, whatever you want to do, so that other people can recognize that you know how to practice good ethical judgment. And believe me, that's going to set you apart from the rest of the world, and I'm quite certain that employers are going to love to see that certified by ES logo on your business card or resume or whatever. But anyhow, I know there are other things you want to talk about here. And
well, there are. But again, you also published some very interesting things on this topic in your letter. The Notre Dame sociological studies suggested that a third of the youth don't have any sense of what is right and wrong. So it's not just a few people here and there. It's a very comprehensive problem. And you talked also, there was a book you mentioned, the California Superintendent of Schools, titled "The Last Chance for Our Children." And this was written some time ago. There was another one as well in the Wall Street Journal you mentioned. So it's a problem that's recognized widely. One more thing, Richard, before I ask you about a couple of other things. With regard to companies that are recognizing, are there some companies, I think you mentioned in your newsletter, maybe there's some companies that might start recognizing this course, and are you marketing it in that regard so that, corporations might say, well, gee, this is a good thing. It's the kind of person I'd like to have that has at least an understanding of what's right and wrong.
Yeah, that's a big thrust that we have, is to go out to companies, and we're working on that now. I mean, the company's only, like 3 weeks old or something like that, so
yeah, right.
We've got a lot of work to do here yet. But, what we would hope to see is that, well, you know how Underwriters Laboratories has its UL sticker that's attached to electrical products. That says,
yes.
That this company knows how to make a good electrical product, and this one has passed our tests. Well, we want ES, Ethics Solutions, to be the human equivalent of the UL label. And that all employers will simply ask you, have you been through the ES course, so that you know how to practice good ethical judgment. And they'll look for that ES logo. That's our goal, and we are reaching out to big corporations to try to get this done as quickly as possible.
Oh, it's you mentioned a company's only 3 weeks old, but you've been working on this and giving a lot of thought to this for quite a while, and before that, though, right, Richard? So.
Oh yeah, it stretches back to my book called "Whatever Happened to Justice," which was published in 1992.
All right.
Ever since I wrote that, which is where I introduced those two fundamental laws, those 17 words. I've had people coming to me. I need a practical, everyday guide on how to apply these laws and how to. I understand that they make all the sense in the world and they're really great and they underlie civilization itself. But tell me how to use them day to day in my life. So that's what Ethics Solutions is.
All right, very good. Well, let me ask you, you sort of related to that, you mentioned in your newsletter that either you or maybe the Wall Street Journal, I can't remember which, were suggesting that one of the reasons for Trump's popularity might be related to this notion that things are really starting to disintegrate in terms of ethical principles.
Yeah, I think that's a definite possibility. I would imagine there are millions of Americans out there that feel that way and are voting for him. I don't think it's the whole population, but especially not politicians. but you talk to anybody. I mean, I handed one of those cards to a massage therapist last week. And she one of our business cards, and the business card explains that we teach ethics. And she looked at that and she said, "Man, I know a lot of people that need this."
Well, maybe you can get her to be a sales rep for you then.
Yeah, right, yeah.
Yeah. You mentioned in your newsletter, this is just, and I bring this up because the Republican National Convention, it was a political season now, how Trump could accidentally trigger off a shooting revolution. Would you care to share your thoughts on that topic?
Right, yeah. And I'm going to explain this in the next Early Warning Report newsletter. Well, no, not the next one, the September issue. I'm going to explain it. The economy of a country conforms to the shape of the legal system. When people pass, or when lawmakers make up a law, that's usually a restriction on somebody, so a business can't move into that area. It's got to go somewhere else. And so you have this, you can imagine a sort of a jagged ceiling, which is the law, and it restricts people's ability to rise above that ceiling. You get punished if you try to do that. Well, what governments do is they're continually making up new laws and changing the shape of this ceiling, and so investors and business people come in and they create businesses that conform to the shape of those laws.
Sure.
Now, Trump is promising to be a maverick who is going to undo thousands of these deals that are put together to create these laws. He may not know that's what he's promising, but that's what he's promising, is he's going to change the shape of the ceiling. So there are going to be huge areas where there will be tremendous opportunities for new companies, and there will be huge areas where companies will be wiped out.
Yeah.
And in those areas where companies are wiped out, there's going to be a lot of mad people. There's going to be a lot of anger as he reconfigures the government, which will reconfigure the economy. So I'm thinking, unless he's learned how to work some kind of miracle, as this reshaping of the legal structure occurs, you're going to have a lot of riots in the streets and who knows what going on with that as people lose their jobs.
Yeah, well, that makes perfect sense to me. Richard, we're just about out of time. I want to remind my listeners that of some of the other great topics in your July newsletter. We won't have time to cover them all. That was one of them. How Trump could accidentally trigger off a shooting revolution, but another one was Clinton's real ideology and how it increases uncertainty, the sovereign debt bomb, and what few Americans know about the Democrat and Republican parties. I mean, all good stuff. And I would just tell my listeners, it's Early Warning Report. Go there, sign up for Richard's newsletter, and ethicssolutions.net, which you can get to through earlywarningsreport.com. Check out that program that Richard was just talking about. Do yourself a favor, do your spouse a favor, do your friends a favor, and Yeah, I think it makes a lot of sense, Richard. I want to thank you very much for being with us today, and we'll look forward to talking to you again sometime in the near future. Thank you so much for being with us.
Yes, thank you, Jay.